Hi, welcome to StashBlaster Quilts. My name's Maria Spitelnik, and I'm here to help you learn how to make more quilts in less time with less stress, whether you're a beginner or you're more advanced. There's always a way to streamline a process or to try something new that you haven't tried before that can make things go a little bit more easily. So that's what I'm here for. So if you haven't been on the channel before, at the beginning I give an organizational tip because as my day job I am a professional organizer, so that's what I do all day. And then after that we will sometimes talk about things I've gotten an email on or a chat line thing either before or after. And then it's just a relaxed, let's talk about a quilt that I'm making. You can watch me or do it along with me depending on the quilt. And we just, have it be a very casual, relaxing kind of a thing. I encourage people to write in on the chat and have a good time. If you like what you see, please hit the subscribe button and then the bell if you want to know when I'm going to be on. But I am on every first and third Wednesday of every month at 7 o'clock. So please join us again. If today's your first day, welcome. If you're a returning person, welcome back. Anyway, so I got an email this week about templates. This person wrote to me and said that they can never find a template that they've made that was, somewhere in the universe of their sewing space. And how do I keep track of my templates? So for me, it depends on what size the template is. So I've mentioned before the drawer system I use for my strips and my blocks and bricks, orphan blocks, etc. They all go into drawers because when they're in tubs, you have to unstack and then restack and then unstack. And it's always the bottom tub that where you want to find that item is going to be located. So rather than having to do that, you can just pull out whichever drawer you need and you're ready to go. So my small templates, I use another little drawer. They make 3 drawer units this big. Okay, not just the 12.5 or 11-inch ones that I showed, but they make small ones like this. So for things like my English paper piecing, like this goes in this drawer. Whether it's paper or these little plastic guys. I've been using these a lot lately. I found some that are itsy bitsy. I showed a hand piece that I'm working on where I think the hexagons finish at 3/8. So it's teeny weeny. And I have found that the plastic is sometimes a little bit easier to deal with than the paper for me. But to each their own. So I put those in these. If I have any of my wax paper type templates that I've made that are small, this is a porcupine. I think you can see that here. And so I have these because I used to make 3-dimensional porcupine pin cushions because it was really cute when you had all the pins sticking out of the back of the porcupine. And I gave them away when I was doing lectures and things like that. But I keep these as well in these little drawers. So anything that's small, you can put up to, I believe, let me just double check here. You can put a 5-inch square in these little drawers. So anything up to that size is going to fit. And they are a little bit longer than they are wide. So if it was like 5 by 6, it would even fit. So you don't have to be teeny weeny to go in these drawers. But when I'm doing something larger, so for example, the second quilt I ever made was for my stepsister. She was getting married, and it's a super king size double wedding ring that I machine pieced and I hand quilted. So it took 51 weeks from my decision to make it till I was embroidering the information along the curve on the plane on the way to the wedding. So I've been there. I know some of you have been there, or you are going to find yourself there. But that's what I was doing. And so I kept those templates as well, but they're, this big. So where do you keep them? This is the perfect time of year for this solution. What I did was I went to Staples, which I used to have near me. They're not there anymore. And I picked up these colored envelopes with the string tie. And they come in all kinds of different colors. My hole punch would not punch these holes. Hold on. Okay, I'm turning around backwards. Here we go. So I went to our local FedEx Kinko's place, and I just punched these holes really quickly in here. I have found some of the single hole punches can go through without too much trouble. I was looking for a 3-hole, and my regular 3-hole doesn't do this. I now have a 1-hole, and I can punch through with no problem. So these are on sale a lot of places because it's back to school time. So you can get these, and then in here you can probably see through. I have all of my templates. So just to give you a better view, let me get this open. So here is the template for the middle section. I call the oval ones lozenges. I don't know what they call this. And so what I did is I just cut out my outer shape and then my 1/4 inch in for my seam. And then I just cut these oddball chunks. I didn't worry about exactly how big they were so that I could trace this line right here with my pencil and get it nice and crisp every time. But I didn't lose the structural integrity that I would have lost had I cut out the middle piece. So you might want to consider that when you're trimming your templates. Okay? So this fits beautifully in this envelope. Like this, you can see. And all of my other pieces are in here. So if I ever decide that I'm going to do another one of these, I have all the parts for it. I've loaned this out a few times because there have been other people who've been interested in doing it. That's one of the nice things that I like about using the template plastic is that it's easy to loan out. You know, paper can be a little bit more difficult, but it's infinitely cheaper if you're using cardboard boxes. So if that's what you're doing, go for it. But that's what I did with this, is that I just keep them in these particular envelopes. So another one I did, it was a commissioned quilt, and it was hearts, you can see here. And so it was just easier to have them on this, and then I had a smaller one I could trace around for my actual stitching line. So these work very, very nicely. They don't wear out, so you can keep them forever. And since they're plastic, if you are carrying them in and out of places in the rain or whatever, then everything stays dry. I put everything into a binder. It is slightly larger, you can see here, than your standard binder. So if your binder fits normally on the shelf, you're going to find that these are going to be a little bit more intrusive. It might stick out a little bit, but I found this really handy. If you have the templates that are even larger, you can purchase templates from various companies that are solid, use forever kinds of templates. I take those, I put them in a zip top bag, and then I will put 2 holes in the top, and I have hooks I hang them on. It's just really not possible to show you that from this angle. And I had one of my cameras break, so I don't have a spare that I can walk around with and be sure that I can do this today. So that's why I have them, but I have them over on the side, and it's very, very convenient. If I need them, I can just pull them off the wall, off the end of the bookcase actually, for most of them, and they're right there ready to use. So the idea is to keep your template parts together. So if you have an inside and an outside, keep them together. You may want to put a code on the top. So if you do have them in one big bin or something, you can always make sure that you have every piece that you need. So example, 1 of 6, 2 of 6, 3 of 6 if it's a bigger item. In which case I'd keep them all in one Ziploc and put a picture of whatever it is on the outside. That's just the easiest way. But if it's something else where you need to mark it in other ways, that works quite well as well. Another thing you can do is if you have things in Ziploc bags, you can take a simple box that paper comes in and put your Ziploc bags upright in the box. Now I would add a piece of cardboard like from a cereal box or something so it stands upright, and you can put strings. And I've done this before where I will take, do I have a box handy? I do not, but let's imagine that my leader and ender box here is a paper box, okay? You could take and put 2 holes here and here, and then run a string in, across, and back, and then just put a knot. And then when you're putting your items in, you put them in this way, and those various string stoppages keep them from flopping over. So you could either subdivide by category. These are applique templates, and these are patterning templates, or you can just say, I just don't want them flopping, and so I'm going to put some strings in towards the end, and then as I get more or make more templates, I have room for them. One thing to keep in mind is that your standard 12-inch shelf, a paper box will have to go the long way on the front edge. If you have some deeper shelves, about 16 inches, you can put them this way, excuse me, which is nice because then you can pull it out and pull what you need easily, and you'll take up less of your linear footage on your shelving. So it's something to keep in mind. Something like this is obviously too small unless you're using small patterns or small appliques. This would work just fine for small appliques, up to probably about 8 inches. So something like this is just a shoebox. I believe I got it at the dollar store or Michael's or something like that. It's an archival quality, not that you need that in this case. Your plastic bags could stand up here just fine. So then you'd subdivide however you want. So that's the answer to the question from my email of how to handle the crazy, out of whack templates that we have. Okay, so that's our tip for the week. Like I said, to subscribe, bell, all of that stuff. So I will be back in 2 weeks with another tip. But from now on, let's talk about the StashBlaster quilts that we've been working on. Honestly, I haven't been back in my sewing room since I did the last one of these 2 weeks ago because it has just been zany at work. So I'll be honest with you, I did pick out the red sashing material, but I haven't processed it by cutting it, tearing it, doing all of that. But let's talk about how I decided on the fabrics that I picked. So I basically had 3 good choices that I liked. And let me pull this over so you can see it a little bit. Actually, maybe I can do this. Hold on. There we go. That's better. Oh, by the way, people told me that they liked having all my color fabrics behind me here. So I may wind up doing this more often just so you can see it. But these are the 8 different rows. They're not regularly placed out there. They're not all spaced out and all that, but I just put them out there so you could kind of see. And I'm going to be using red sashing in between. So this was one that I looked at, and I thought this would be kind of bold and cool up here against the red, and against the white and blue, and I had plenty of it. But it does have a couple of drawbacks. Number one, it's a little bit heavier than your normal quilting material, and so that would make it a little bit more difficult to work with. And then I got to thinking about how bold this is. And in sashing, we'd lose a lot of that because you'd only get a partial strip of some of these things. And also, some of these are fairly subtle, and they'd get overwhelmed by such a big, strong, bold print. So this may actually go on the back. Haven't decided yet. Then I found this one. Now, I like it, but neither piece of it that I have is quite long enough to do the kind of cutting we talked about where we were going to have the 2 short sides all done in one strip, and that way everything would get torn easily, one with the fabric, and we'd be good. Now I could certainly do this. I would have extra pieces to cut down, which is of course a good thing because then it goes in my drawers over there. But I was also thinking that since this is going to be a red, white, and blue quilt, I may not want to have something that could be conceived as more feminine, just because this is such a pretty floral pattern. Now, I understand flowers are for men too, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times with the military, this can be kind of iffy. Of course, there's also women soldiers, so that's why I was thinking about it and thinking about it again and thinking about it again and thinking about it again. Ultimately, what I decided to do is play it safe. It's really what it is. I have this red. I don't know if you can see it here. I'm going to try to get it into the camera. Okay, those are little gold dots. And what I was thinking is with the military, there's often gold for medals, gold trims, things like that. So having those little gold dots kind of went with my military theme. There's plenty here. I didn't have to worry about it. And it's not going to distract from my other prints. So that's the one that I picked and why I picked it. So how are we going to do this? Well, I have found over the years that I can cut perfect strips. And I do for other types of quilts. For the StashBlaster quilt, StashBlaster 1, this is a variant of. I'm often doing it with big crowds of people. We've had 50 people in a room doing these all day. So speed is of the essence and organization is huge to make it work. So how do I cut when I'm doing it perfectly? I will take and cut off my selvage perfectly straight the whole length, and then I will cut from that clean edge. I will fold either in half or even in quarters, but line that cut edge up so it's perfectly straight, and then I'll cut from there. In this particular case, I'm going to be going the full length of fabric, even though this is more than I need. Why? Because I'm replenishing my my strip wall, plus I like this red and gold for other sashing or potentially bindings, which I also do at 2.5. So it won't hurt for me to have a lot of 2.5-inch strips of this, even though they're going to be a lot longer than your average. It means less piecing later. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it right here with you, I am going to go ahead. Now, yes, this is a little bit wrinkled. I don't care. It's fine that it's a little bit wrinkled. We're going to go with it. Yes, when I'm about ready to sew, I will take this downstairs. I'll get the middle fold wrinkle out as well as the fold right at the halfway point, if it's in any of the strips. It sometimes works out that that fold is right where I need it to be. I cut off 1/8 of an inch or tear it or whatever, and I have all clean edges and I don't have to worry about it. It all depends on the size of your strip because they're not all the same. And it depends on how straight the grain is, because it's going to tear on the grain. For a lot of people, when you're doing clothing, grain is of the utmost importance. Hold on one second. Before I sneezed like that, I apologize. When you're sewing fabric for clothing, your straight of grain is hugely important because your pieces won't lie right and fall right over your shoulders or around your waist, or the hem won't lie, will have ripples in it. So it's super duper important. For quilting, it's a wonderful habit to be in, is to make sure you get straight of grain. I'm not saying not to. But I am saying that in this particular case, it's an advantage that we're going to be on straight of grain when we do this, but it's one that on my regular piecing I might not worry about as much. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to snip my fabric. This actually has a pretty healthy selvage on it. So you can see this little piece here. and then all I'm going to do is tear it. So I'm hoping this isn't too loud with the microphone right on my shirt here. And this is starting to get it. Okay, I never promised you grace. I never promised you that I was going to be the perfect example of everything. But all right, so I am tearing this. And this is a very long piece here. Okay, so just to give you an example, let me reach down and get this. I tore the selvage, and you can see that it didn't make a big difference in the width of the fabric. Okay, it is slightly off from when it got spun onto the bolt, but not enough that you would notice. So instead of taking my time to do that meticulously clean edge in order to do these quilts, here it is, it's done. Okay, now from the same edge that I just tore, I'm going to go back to the beginning. Okay, so this is my torn edge right here. Okay, this is my width of fabric. So I have a ruler right here. Got to put the glasses on at this point. Sorry about that. I have been told that the glasses are not a really aesthetic thing. Okay, so I'm going to mark 6.5 just with my finger. See, high-tech instruments here. I'm going to go ahead and do a little snip. 6.5, that's my borders. So when I do this, one of these strips will be enough for my 2 short sides, and then one of the next 2 strips will be each of the other 2 sides for my outer border. Now, this material is too long, okay? I've got more than enough here, but like I said, what I'll do is I will process it if it's at least 12.5 inches long, and I'll know that because my ruler's 12.5, right? Then it'll go in my strip drawer. If it's smaller than that, it'll get cut into 6.5 inch squares. And for that, I will use an actual rotary cutter. I'll stack them up and I'll whack them off at the right length. So these are going to have to get trimmed down to the correct size. Now, oops, I lost my edge here. Okay, again, my torn edge. Now, I could measure again, because my ruler's right here. But instead, what I think I'm going to just do is take my first strip, lay it on here, okay, and use it to tell me where to cut the next strip. Now, I can do more than one of these at once. So I've cut my 6.5. I've marked for another 6.5. I need one more at 6.5. So I'm going to lay this on there. And I'm going to cut. Okay. Now, I also need 2.5s. So right at this point, if I want to, see, here's my second and my first. So here's the 2 I still have, right? I could go ahead and cut my 2.5s right out of this. Now here I need to measure. So I need to measure at least for the first one. But since I'm going to be doing multiple at a time, I'll cut the first one, slide it down, cut the next one, slide it down. Now, again, one of the benefits to this particular quilt, what if I get this wrong? No one will ever know. because it's going to be horizontal strips. They're not going to be next to anything else other than a big chunky side border. So if you get it wrong, only you will know. So don't worry about it. Okay? That's what these quilts are designed for, to be incredibly forgiving. If you didn't see the earlier episode, these strips I was supposed to cut at 6.5, but I grabbed the wrong ruler. I have a ruler that's 6.5 by 24 and one that's 6 by 24. And I grabbed the 6 instead of 6.5. What difference does that make? It means my quilt's going to be a little bit shorter, but it doesn't make any difference. They're all cut at 6, and we're good to go. Okay? If they'd been cut at 4 3/8, this design still works. So, we're not going to worry about that. So, if you're off a thread or two, in your sizing, again, this doesn't work for every quilt. Believe me, there are quilts you're going to have to be exact. But Stash Blasters are designed so you don't have to be. This is what I sew at 3 o'clock in the morning if I can't sleep. If I have people coming over and we're sitting around chatting, these are the kinds of things that I prep or I will sew. I also do handwork when I'm around people, but I always make sure it's nothing super duper important to me because I don't want to mess it up. Okay, now I'm just about to cut the last one. Okay, now I have less than an inch of usable width before I get to the selvage. Now, what do? It's more than a half of an inch, so I'm actually going to tear the selvage as well, and I'm going to use that 3/4 of an inch strip. Most people don't bother, okay? But I take these. I got the idea from Karen Brown. This was wonderful in Just Get It Done Quilts. And so I'm using her adding kit method. And I'm just adding strips on. And they don't have to be an inch or larger. I can take some of my little strips. I put a narrower seam on it. Doesn't matter. And I make these very long strip sets that I can then trim out 1/4 of an inch bigger, so the ends have to be a little chunkier. But I can trim it out a little bigger, and then it can go into a quilt or into the back of a quilt, or I can do anything I want to with it. Okay, so I'm just going to sit here and tear. So I'm back to the beginning. I'm going to do the big ones first. I prefer to go all the way down on one strip. I have seen Eleanor Burns, who is the first person I ever saw who did the tearing instead of the cutting, which I thought was kind of messy and weird because I was a precision quilter more at the time than I am now. But what's fun is that she'll have 2 people, and they'll each have a couple of strips in hand. And so the person on this side will grab their strip and pull down and do 2 of them at the same time. I have done where I've just started at the top and gone all the way across. I just find this a little bit more relaxing. I'm hoping it's not too loud with the microphone. If it is and you're on watching, please go ahead and let me know in the chat. It does appear that most of you watch later. So I understand if you can't because it's not happening right while you're looking at it. So anyway, so that's what I'm going to do. Is I'm just going to sit here and get these torn. Now, when you're working with a torn edge, you're going to have the fuzzy edge, and then you're going to have the first real thread. Okay? The solid one that's going to go the full length. That's what I guide my 1/4 of an inch on. Okay? You could do it from the fuzzy end, but some fabrics tear with more of a fuzz than another, and you're not going to get consistent results. So by doing it this way, you will. And you should be pretty happy with it when you're done. It's kind of funny because some quilt shops now, and one of the ones we have here, the Quilter Studio, will ask, do you want your material cut or torn? Because when you have it torn, it will be on straighted grain, but it's not always perfect to the end, simply because of how fabric gets mangled when it gets rolled onto the bolt. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You can tear with the fabric too. You don't have to go long ways like me. The reason that I'm doing this long ways, if you haven't been here for those sections before, is it's less piecing for me. Because if I'm doing, let's say, a binding, then you're piecing all of these with the fabrics together, which means you lose the 2.5 inches on each strip where you're going to be doing your diagonal seam, right? So that's 5 inches per join, basically, because 2.5 from one and 2.5 from the other. If I go lengthwise and it's long enough that I don't have to piece it, A, I save the piecing time, B, I save the oh crud, I sewed it the wrong direction problem, which I still do occasionally. And the third being, I thought I had enough, but now I'm 2 inches too short. And that's been known to happen to me. By having it be the length I need and I don't have to piece, I know I have the length I need. I know there's plenty there. It is a little bit more waste of fabric because you'll notice I'm tearing a whole bunch of these. I'm not going to need this many of the 2.5 inch strips. But for me, it's going to get rolled onto a toilet paper tube and put onto my binding wall. And then if I either need sashing or I want to do a binding, I already have a lot of the work done. It's been pressed, so it's nice and straight, and it's ready to go for any purpose I have for it. And it's still going to be less piecing, because even for a binding, in this particular case, I'm going to have 11 feet instead of under 4, which is what you would get from your width of fabric, because your width of fabric is usually somewhere in the 40 to 42 inch range, which is about 3.5 feet. Okay, that being 36 plus 6, okay, would be your 41 inches. Okay, so about 3.5 feet. This is 11 feet, so I've cut out a couple of seams there. Now, yes, sometimes I still have to piece, but if I'm doing it once or twice, that's different than doing it 8 or 9 times. And I do a lot of bigger quilts too, where I'm trying to do a continuous bias binding, and I have to do all those calculations, and then you get some that are really close. Some of the seams are close together and some are further apart, so it's a little less consistent looking. And so as long as straight of grain binding works for you, so you can't do this if you're doing something like a double wedding ring. If you're doing something where your edges need to have the play, you can't just tear it. But if you're piecing with strips, sure, go ahead, because you want to be on the straighted grain if you're sewing strips together. If you're doing a binding and you don't care that it's flat, that's fine too. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I'm going to have tons of this left over. I should probably have about 3 strips that I'm not going to need for this StashBlaster quilt. And that is just fine with me, because I only need 7, and there's 2 per length, so I only need 3.5 of these strips, and I've got like 6 or 7 of them, so I'm gonna be fine. Okay, so I'm almost there. For those of you who haven't been on before, these are my design walls. They're gray on this side, and they're cream on this side, so I can flip them around depending on whether I'm doing light or dark piecing, or if it's just too close to tell your color differential on one side, then you go to the other side. And then these hide my yardage. So I have 4 of these that I can flip around. And then these things you're seeing dangling, these are the tiebacks. These hold them in position. So this is the gray color. And so every other shelf alternates. So I have the cream ones, and then the gray, and then the cream, and then the gray. And since they're mounted to the shelf, if I rearrange my shelves, the tiebacks just stay right there with them. The idea here is that I put out the color that matches the design board, and they don't disappear, but they kind of disappear. The only problem is that if you've got pieces over it, you've got a little bump in the middle. But if they're that big, you're probably going to have to do something anyway. If I'm worried about it, I will just give them a little bit of a lean back, like I'm doing with this one, and not have the tiebacks in position. If you are interested in seeing how I do this, in terms of how I built these, just let me know. I'll be happy to go over that with you on one of these. Okay, now I'm just at this point I'm down to the selvage and that little bit. Now I'll admit, sometimes I say selvage, sometimes I say salvage, which is a completely different word. I get that. It's just how I grew up. It was a salvage. So sometimes I mess it up, and I apologize if you catch me in that. Okay, so here is my selvage from the second side. Here are my strips that are really too small because they're less than an inch. So this is going to go into my scraps because I'm cheap. Okay, I admit it. I see no reason to have fabric that I paid good money for, or somebody gave it to me, but I washed it, dried it, pressed it, cut it. So I'm paying with my time. Oops, I'm sorry about that. I hope that wasn't too bad. So I'm paying with my time to just throw it away. Okay. When Bonnie Hunter said that the 1 square inch is going to cost you the same whether it goes in the quilt or in the trash can, that really kind of hit home for me. And so at that point I was like, yeah, nothing is hitting the trash can. So that's not exactly true. What tends to happen is at my Quilt Guild meetings, because I belong to 2 chapters of the Quilters Unlimited Guild here in Virginia, I will have people who come by and just drop off baggies or bags with me. Sometimes they don't even tell me that they've done it. Sometimes they just leave it on my chair and then scurry away so they don't get identified with the scraps. I also have people who have been known to drive by my house because I'm listed in our directory, and they'll drive by my house and just leave garbage bags of scraps on my doorstep, and then they drive off. The most I've ever had was 6 giant lawn and leaf bags worth of fabric that got left at my house. I have no idea who left it. And one of the reasons for that is because when my life is more normal than it is right now, I do a lot of charity sewing. And so they know that I'm going to be making things like the StashBlaster Quilts and those other things, that I'm going to be creating a bunch of charity stuff. So normally I would be sewing right now because there was just a hurricane in Louisiana, and I would be sending quilts down there. Now, unfortunately, I've been working 12 to 16-hour days for the last several weeks. And in fact, I don't even have a day off during Labor Day weekend. I'm working all 3 days. So given that, I'm not doing a lot of sewing right now. But I normally do. And it's not unusual for me to ship 100 quilts off to somewhere. And it's much easier to do when people are generous and have given me material. Now, I'm incredibly thankful, don't get me wrong. This doesn't work for everyone. Okay, there are some people who just can't let loose and just wing it. You know, you've got to have a pattern, you've got to have the correct colors for your time, because the time you're putting in, you know, you're going to be very concerned about. These quilts are designed to just let her rip. Try something new. It's really kind of cool because sometimes I get material that I would never use myself. Wild African prints is not my kind of material that I think of when I'm going to go and buy material. It's just not something that calls to me. But if it's in my stash and it's time to do a StashBlaster quilt because my drawers are full, it gets pulled out. It gets used. I get to play with it. So it's really kind of nice, and it's in a manageable amount. Now, I will say that some people have considered scraps volume that I would never consider scraps. I think the largest piece of material I ever had was a fatback. So it's 109 inches wide, and there were almost 9 yards of it. Apparently, they just decided they didn't like that color anymore, or they didn't need it because they finished that quilt, and they put it in their scrap bag and gave it to me. That was a couple of really nice backs. But mostly, I get stuff that maybe this big or smaller. And these take a long time to process. But I don't want it to be in the landfill. So I do that. Now, there are amounts that I do actually get rid of. If it's less than, let's say, 3/4 of an inch. So if it's like 1/2 inch or smaller for sure, but if it's in the 1/2 to 3/4, I have to kind of look at it. If it's smaller than that, it goes into a baggie. And then I give the baggie to a friend of mine who does confetti quilts. So she takes those and she sorts them by color, and then she takes a rotary cutter and she cuts them into these little teeny tiny little nothings, like 1/8 of an inch. And then she puts them down on a quilt and she'll sprinkle them on, and then she puts okay, some people say tulle, some people say toile. I say tulle. Tulle over the top, and then she stitches it down. And so she uses thread ends. She does ask me to sort the thread ends because they're just too big a pain to sort, one teeny tiny thread at a time. So I'll do that. So I have little bags of white thread and blue thread and red thread. That's all she asks, because of the major color groups. And so even those, they get all chopped up and they get put into these quilts. So we go from garbage bag to little snack bags or sandwich bags to nothing. And so, unfortunately, right now, she is inundated with confetti stuff. But, it works. It's a way to help. So even if my stuff went to the landfill, instead of garbage bags worth, it's sandwich bags worth. And so the money isn't being wasted, the time hasn't been wasted, the material is being used, it's not just turning into fodder. I do know some people who take their scraps, and they especially their teeny weeny stuff, and they put it outside for the birds in the spring. And so the birds will come and they'll take the threads and the little pieces of fabric, and they put them into their nests. So in her neighborhood, if you drive around, and you have to look up into the trees because, of course, the green has come out, you can see little splashes of color that have come from her backyard, because she just puts out this shallow tray with tons and tons of scraps, so they can come and they just weave those in as if they were grass. So that's kind of fun too. So some people put them into dog beds. Whatever you're comfortable with your scraps, I say go for it. Pick a size that's too small for you. For me, itsy bitsy. But for most people, it could be a 2.5 inch is as small as you want to go. A jelly roll is as small as you want to go. That's fine. Either give what's left over to somebody else who likes to do the tiny stuff, like those little bitty hexagons I mentioned earlier, or find another purpose for it instead of just putting it into the trash. Other quilters would love it. Even your oddball shapes, you can make chip blocks. Some people call them crumb blocks, where you just piece together whatever little tiny nothings you have until you've created a new piece of fabric. And those are particularly cool for things like flying geese. So you'll have that big honkin' triangle that could be 3 by 6 inches finished, but it may have 40 different fabrics in it. That's pretty cool to look at, because it adds a lot of character to a quilt. So if that's something that you're interested in. Usually I find the 5-square method of making flying geese the best one to use for chip blocks in that case, because there's a lot of seams going on there. But whatever you're comfortable with will work. So anyway, that's it on the small scraps. That light bulb has been out for 2 weeks and it just came on. Okay. I have been doing these for a little while, not very long. I'm not from the generation that's always doing selfies and has been taking videos since cell phones came out. But I have this problem with technology in general. And so each one of these episodes that I have filmed has had some sort of a problem. So last time it was the fact that the camera doesn't work. And we haven't figured out if it's the camera or not at this point, because it'll work and then it doesn't work. And we think it's the camera. But that meant moving other cameras around and stuff last time. So this time, I got in. I've forgotten about the light bulb because, like I said, I haven't been back in here in the 2 weeks since my last YouTube video live. And so I got in and I was like, okay, I had to rearrange how the cameras were set up so that I could remember and go to the right ones. And of course, a light turns on that wasn't on before. So technology is kind of weird here. I have to say, I'm just pleased to have electricity. In Louisiana, they're saying it's going to be days and it's going to be in the upper 90s. Here in Virginia, we've had a lot of 90-degree days, but this next week is supposed to be in the 80s, so that's not going to be so bad. But even so, it's got to be miserable and hot and humid and nasty down there. I know sending quilts would be weird, because I certainly don't need the quilts at the moment, but it does get cooler at night. And it's also one of those things that says that somebody cares. So I'd have done it anyway, but it is kind of strange to do it in August, especially in the south where it's so hot. But we've been getting thunder and lightning here pretty bad. We had a tornado warning today, but luckily, as far as I know, we haven't had a tornado. And I'm being distracted. I thought I turned... Oh, so my phone died. My phone died spectacularly. Now, we were going to be going and getting the new phones on the weekend. And this is the Wednesday before, which is when I was doing my YouTube Live. So it was the last time I was on here. My phone would not get off the screen, the Google screen that first comes up when you start turning on your phone. It would stop and then it would reboot and it would reboot and then it would reboot. So it was never get to anywhere I could do anything with it. So I had my son let me know when I ultimately went live to make sure I actually was, because my first 3 or 4 of these I thought I was live and I wasn't because of various technical and different technical problems. So my phone didn't work last time. So now I have a new phone. And I've been going through the whole, I need a new ringtone, I need a new notification thing. Well, it's been chiming over here, and I don't know how to stop it. So one of my goals for the next 2 weeks is to figure out how to make this thing be quiet, because I turned off the sound. So I'm not sure what the problem is. So I thought I turned everything off, but it's still chiming. So I apologize. Oh, my nose is... Okay. So anyway, so that's what's going on with that. So I've been dealing with it and trying to figure it. So that's been sucking up a bunch of time too. We had wanted another Pixel, and when we ultimately bought the phone, there were none to be had. Well, 2 days later, they announced that they're coming out with the Pixel 6, so they've stopped making the Pixel 4 and 5. The phone I had before was the original, so that tells you how long ago it was I had to deal with a phone. So now I have the Samsung Ultra, because it's the only one they had 3 of, and I needed 3 that matched so that Scott wouldn't have to go crazy trying to learn how to fix the problems that I create on my phone. where he couldn't test it on his phone. So we have these. They're a little bit larger than we prefer, but that's okay. But in general, it's a new phone. I have pictures on it. I have some quilt pictures on it, which are cool. Tons of work photos, of course. But yet, it's yet one more piece of technology that I've got to get figured out before my next one of these, so that it stops chiming and being loud and obnoxious. So, I am hoping that things will settle down and I'll be able to get some stuff done around here, including some sewing. Worst comes to worst, I will make sure that these get pressed, and I will be able to sew with you next time. So if worst comes to worst and things continue to be just as crazy as they've been, we'll still get to do some sewing, so that'll be good. It's not quite 8 o'clock, but I think that this is a good place to stop. So I will say goodbye for today. It's a little bit shorter than usual. Sorry about that. But I think that next time we're going to see a lot more red. And hopefully we'll get this alternate version of StashBlaster 1 sewn and in the books. By the way, if you go to StashBlasters.com, the StashBlaster 1, the original, which is visible in the last video I did, any of the quilts that are labeled StashBlaster are free. You're also welcome to use them for guild events, for charity events. I'm more than happy for you to go ahead and use them. There are things that I teach when I'm teaching the StashBlaster that's not included, and I have some other handouts that go with that. But pretty much everything you need is there. I am so close to finishing the editing for the video to go with StashBlaster 1. I think all I have left is the fabric requirement portion. I think I've done all the sewing parts, but it's been long enough now. I have to go back through and review the whole thing, and with these long days, I haven't been able to. But that will come out as soon as I can possibly do it. And I will go back through and edit all of the lives to give you the organizational tip so that that'll be more consistent. So I do have it on the plan to do that. I'm sorry I haven't been able to. But I do want you to know, StashBlasters, free to use, not a problem. The other patterns, of course, those you'll pay for, and those I ask you not to just disseminate. But if it says StashBlaster on it, you're welcome to. So anyway, so there are 4 StashBlaster quilts. 3 of them are in the final patterning phase. And so as soon as I can get to them, I will get them finished and up on the website for you as well. So that's kind of where things stand at the moment. It is 8 minutes to 8. Have a great night. If you are watching this at a later date, please feel free to shoot me an email at mail, M-A-I-L, at StashBlasterQuilts.com and ask whatever questions you have. I will either use them for an organizational tip, or I will answer them separately depending on where they kind of belong in the grand scheme of things. But I hope you all have a wonderful week, a couple of weeks, and I will see you the 3rd Wednesday and then the 1st Wednesday of every month. Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye. Now, let's get sewing.